Since the time of Christ's departure, one question has been in the forefront of the minds of prophecy believers. When will Christ return to defeat the Antichrist and usher in the millennium? Many prophecy believers search the Bible for clues to the end of time. One prophetic concept has come to dominate their calculations.
The rebirth of the state of Israel is the super sign. It's the sign amongst all others that suggests, man, we're really close.
In future years, you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel.
For all of its history since the 1830s, dispensationalists were predicting the refounding of the state of Israel.
Now, learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near.
God clearly shows that the fig tree is his people Israel. He said when the fig tree puts on fresh leaves, that's what happened to Israel in 1948. Israel was not born, it was restored. It put on fresh leaves.
For many prophecy believers, the rebirth of Israel in 1948 marked the beginning of the countdown to the Antichrist, the second coming, and the end of the world as we know it. They believe the generation that witnessed the events of 1948 will also witness the showdown between Christ and Antichrist.
I tell you the truth. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened.
The things that Matthew refers to are wars, famines, earthquakes, all in a short period of tribulation, followed by the return of Christ. In response to these passages, many have set dates for the end times, including best-selling prophecy writer Hal Lindsey.
Editions of the late great Planet Earth clearly suggest that the end will come in 1988. So his book appeared in 1970, so he had an 18-year run before he was disproven.
Nevertheless, many believe 1948 remains the start date for the march toward Armageddon. They turn their attention to interpreting how many years constitute a biblical generation.
A generation would be 100 years. 1948 was the beginning. So we are coming close to the close of this generation. And it's not that long.
But as disturbing as some of these arguments may be, Hal Lindsey and Benny Hinn are merely part of a long tradition of believers who feel they are living near the end of time. In the 19th century, William Miller, a Baptist preacher in Vermont, made an end-time prediction that became known as the Great Disappointment.
He was virtually uneducated, he was self-taught, and he came to the conclusion that Jesus Christ would return to earth around 1843 or 1844. He began to teach this message throughout upstate New York and Vermont.
This is a Millerite chart. It's a prophecy chart that depicts the end of time. It was published in 1842 for use throughout the year because he predicted, as the chart shows, that the end of time would indeed come in 1843. On the left, you have the images and the text from the book of Daniel. And on the right, you have the images and text from the book of Revelation.
When 1843 came and went without the world ending, Miller recalculated, claiming that he hadn't accounted for the transition from BC to AD.
And finally he calculated, using what he called millennial arithmetic, that Jesus would return October 22nd, 1844. At that point, the Millerites dropped everything. They quit their jobs, they stopped working the fields, they paid off their debts.
This second prophecy failure was known as the Great Disappointment because of the anguish the faithful felt that the millennium was not at hand. Nonetheless, interest in end-of-time prophecy remained high. In the latter part of the 20th century, any major shift in the Middle East could inspire millennial thinking.
I remember very clearly in June of 1967, I was playing outside on a nice warm summer day, and my mother came to the front door and summoned me and said, "Son, this is it. Get ready, Jesus is coming back at any moment." And this was during the Six-Day War, and it was her understanding on her reading of the book of Revelation that this was, that is the Israeli recapturing of the ancient city of Jerusalem was the final precondition for the return of Jesus.
Israel's significance for prophecy believers is not simply an issue of faith. It has political implications as well.
There are a number of prophecy writers today who are very directly trying to shape American administration policy on very specific issues with reference to Israel.
Dispensationalists would say that in the chaos of the Middle East, Antichrist will come and make that peace.
But most scholars discount the idea that some biblical super sign was fulfilled by the founding of Israel in 1948. They contend that biblical passages in the Old Testament refer to a return from exile that happened thousands of years ago.
Some of the earliest setting would arise from passages like Ezekiel and Daniel that were projected against times of stress. For example, Ezekiel is written against the backdrop of the Babylonian captivity. Ezekiel was written during the time of the exile and their expectations for returning to the land.
After the Persians conquered Babylonia in 539 BC, Jews were allowed to return to Judea, starting in 538 BC. For scholars, 1948 may have no biblical significance at all. Moreover, some say attempts to predict or even to influence the end of time runs contrary to the nature of Scripture.
Scripture itself is clear that whatever the final moment might be and whatever shape it might take, it is beyond our knowing.
I'm not a young man, I'm 60. I have been watching Sunday morning televangelists since I was a child, and the one thing that is true about all of them from the beginning until now is that they all say that the end is upon us.
But if, as prophecy believers say, the world as we know it will someday be devastated by an Antichrist who brings on the battle of Armageddon and incites horrible judgments from God, who in this scenario will be saved? And who will be singled out for the most brutal punishment?
Hello, I'm Patrick Cox, founder of TaxMan.